Today you'll learn the scariest stories according to Reddit users. Let's get started. Stories 1.
A weary traveler checked into a small, seemingly ordinary hotel late one evening. The building was old with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, but there was something strangely inviting about it. The receptionist was an older woman with an impassive expression who handed him his key without saying much. Just one rule. Whatever you do, do not look into the unmarked room down the hall on your way to your room. It's off limits. Curious but exhausted, he nodded, accepting his key, and made his way to the room. The hall was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of dust and age. As he passed the unmarked door, a sudden urge to peek crept up on him. He stopped, his hand hovering near the doorframe. He bent down to the keyhole and pressed his eye against it. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. A woman was sitting in the corner of the room, her back to the door, her face hidden. She was perfectly still, almost unnaturally so, like she wasn't even breathing. He felt the unsettling sensation that she was aware of him watching her, though she didn't move. For a moment he considered knocking, but then thought better of it. Whatever it wasn't his place to disturb her. He left, forcing himself to forget about the locked room and the woman inside. The next morning his curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that dark room, so still, her presence almost suffocating. He passed the door again, and despite the warning, he bent down to the keyhole. What he saw made his heart stop. All he could see through the keyhole now was red, a dark, almost unnatural red. The color seemed to pulse, as though it was alive, moving and shifting in a way that shouldn't have been possible. His mind raced with possibilities. He assumed the woman must have known he had peered inside the night before and had covered the hole with something red, perhaps fabric, out of anger or spite. Unable to quell his rising anxiety, he went to the receptionist to ask about the room. The old woman's face didn't change as she looked up at him. "I saw the woman in the room," he said, voice shaking. "Who is she? What happened in there?" The receptionist's eyes darkened and she sighed. "You should have listened to the rule," she murmured, her voice lower now. "A woman was murdered in that room many years ago. She was found just like you saw her, sitting in the corner, still as death, but her eyes were red. Not from blood, mind you. They were red all over, as though they'd been soaked in something darker. And now, many guests who stay here have seen her ghost." The receptionist's voice dropped to a whisper. "Her eyes were always red. She's never left." The traveler's breath caught in his throat. He realized with growing dread that he had made a grave mistake by looking. What he didn't know, what no one could ever warn him about, was that the woman with red eyes had already noticed him long before he had peered through the keyhole, and she was waiting for him still.
Stories 2.
My uncle is a firefighter, and over the years, he's shared some truly disturbing stories, ones that linger in your mind long after the words are spoken. But there's one that still haunts me to this day. It was a regular day when my uncle was first on the scene of a horrific car accident. A massive transport truck had been driving ahead of a small family's car, when without warning, a log, huge and heavy, slipped off the truck and crashed into the car behind it. The force of the impact was enough to shear the top of the car right off, leaving nothing but a mangled shell of metal and glass. Inside, the family was unrecognizable. The parents were still seated in the front, their bodies slumped unnaturally in the wreckage. But that wasn't the worst part. My uncle found a child in the back seat. The little one had been lying down, sleeping soundly when the accident happened. When he awoke, the world had gone silent. The first thing he saw as he opened his eyes was the lifeless, headless bodies of his parents still upright in their seats. The child didn't scream. He didn't cry. There was only the cold realization that his world had been destroyed in an instant. My uncle told me that it's one of those moments that's almost impossible to forget. The child's eyes, wide and empty, staring at the lifeless remains of his parents. The trauma from that moment would forever scar him. I've heard others tell similar stories about crashes like that one, about the devastating, unimaginable aftermath of accidents that no one should ever witness. I'm not even sure if my uncle's version is entirely true, or if it's just another tale passed around the firefighting community, like many others. But I've learned that sometimes the most twisted things are the ones that are closest to reality. He's also told me about other grisly details, like the misconception that when someone jumps from a building, their body splatters on impact. In reality, they don't splatter, they bounce. It's a disturbing image that I can't shake from my mind, even though I wish I could. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, are a stark reminder of the horrors my uncle faces every day. And the reality is, some things can never be unseen.
Stories 3.
When I was about 4 years old and my sister was barely 1, my parents had been divorced for a few months. One summer, my mother decided to take us on a long road trip from Las Vegas to Wichita to visit our grandparents. It was supposed to be a simple drive, but something happened along the way that I've never forgotten. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, we stopped at a gas station. As my mom was filling up the car, a man approached. He was polite, maybe even charming, and said, "I hate to see a single mother traveling alone. I noticed we're headed in the same direction, and I'd be happy to follow you for a while, just to make sure you're safe." His words seemed harmless enough, but something about him set my mom on edge. She politely declined and drove off, but the feeling lingered. At the next stop, things took a darker turn. The same man appeared. He approached my mom again, his smile too wide, his demeanor too casual. "Just checking on you," he said, as if he had a right to. My mom tried to stay calm, telling him once again that we were fine and didn't need his help. But as he spoke, a gust of wind blew his sport coat open for just a second, and I saw it. Tucked into his pants, hidden beneath the fabric, was a gun. My heart dropped. I didn't say anything then, but as we drove off, I whispered to my mom, "He has a gun." Her face went pale, but she didn't panic. Instead, she immediately grabbed a pen and quickly scribbled a note to give to the next gas station attendant. The note detailed our names, the hotel we were planning to stay at, and a description of the man, along with the crucial detail that he was following us. She wrote, "Please call the law in the town we were heading to and have them meet us at the hotel." We pulled into the next gas station. My mom didn't waste any time. She rushed inside, handed the note to the clerk, and sped off with us, not saying a word. My stomach twisted in knots. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. When we reached the hotel, my mom didn't stop at the front desk. She just drove around to the back, where the manager was waiting for us. He handed us a room key, and we went straight to the room, locking the door behind us. We didn't even sit down. It wasn't long before the man showed up, exactly as we had feared. He walked up to the front desk and casually asked the manager, "Has my wife and kids checked in yet? What room are they in?" The manager didn't hesitate. He handed him the key to the room where the police were waiting. Moments later, officers appeared at the door, arresting him on the spot. After some questioning, they discovered the horrifying truth. He was a convicted rapist and had a warrant out for his arrest. If my mom hadn't trusted her instincts, we might have never made it to that hotel. We were just a few steps ahead of him, and that was all it took. The manager gave us another room, this one with pizza and soda, and we settled in, shaken but safe. Looking back, I realize how close we were to something much worse. That man had been watching us, following us for miles, and if not for my mom's quick thinking and that simple note, the outcome could have been very different.
Stories 4.
When my friend was around 8 or 9, she had an unsettling experience that still sends shivers down her spine. One afternoon, she was walking home from school, carrying the usual weight of her school bag and the anticipation of the quiet house she would return to. Her mum always worked late. As she approached their front door, she pulled out her key, ready to let herself inside. But just as she raised it to the lock, something unexpected happened. The door creaked open. There, standing in the doorway in her dressing gown, was her mum. But something was off. Her mum's face was pale, her hair a bit disheveled from a day of sickness, but it was her eyes that were unsettling. Her mum stared right past my friend, as if she wasn't even there. "Who are you?" her mum asked, her voice flat, almost mechanical. Confused and a little frightened, my friend turned around, thinking there might be someone behind her. What she saw made her blood run cold. A man, tall and wearing a long coat, was hurrying away down the path. He didn't look back. He didn't even break his stride. He simply vanished into the street, as though he'd never been there. In that moment, it dawned on my friend. Her mum, who had called in sick that day, had been home at just the right time. Had she not stayed home, there was no telling what might have happened. The strange man in the long coat? My friend would never know what he intended, but the look in her mum's eyes, the confusion, the fear, suggested he wasn't a harmless stranger. Her mum had no memory of what happened. When she'd opened the door, she thought she'd seen nothing more than her daughter returning from school, but her instincts had saved them both. The man had been there for something, and whatever it was, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. My friend often wonders what might have happened if her mum hadn't been there that day, and whether that stranger had been watching her long before she stepped onto that path.
Stories 5. Back in 5th grade, I stumbled upon a strange treasure. One of those early online chat rooms, this one dedicated to all things Pokemon, hosted by Yahoo. I wasn't sure what to expect, but once I entered, it quickly became my second home. The room was full of maybe 15 regulars, kids around my age, most of us between 12 and 16, all sharing the same passion for role-playing, anime, and Pokemon lore. It was a fun escape from reality. Over time, I grew close to a few of the other regulars, and soon enough we were chatting on AIM and, in some cases, talking on the phone. One of these guys stood out, a little eccentric, definitely a bit of an oddball, but someone I felt I could talk to. His interests were unusual, though. He was obsessed with creature models and monster stories, stuff like Godzilla, Spawn, and more. He was fascinated by cryptids like the chupacabra, which I thought was just silly folklore, but it didn't matter. We got along just fine. He lived out in the boonies in some Midwestern state, a place that seemed so remote and isolated to my young West Coast mind. Over the years, we spoke for hours, hundreds of hours on the phone. I learned a lot about him and vice versa. But there was something he had never told me, something that lingered beneath the surface, unspoken. And then, one day, he shared it. His voice was shaky, quiet, as he slowly started to confess something I wasn't prepared for. He said, sometimes he would black out. He'd wake up in strange places, disoriented, and realize that he had done things, horrible things. Things he couldn't remember but couldn't deny either. He described waking up to find that he had hurt or tortured animals, or worse, sometimes children. His cousins, the neighbor kids, people close to him. He even admitted to killing animals. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was sickened. I loved animals, always had. And this, what he was telling me, chilled me to the bone. I didn't know how to respond. It was one of those moments where you're frozen in place, unsure how to process the gravity of what's been said. He was sobbing now, telling me that I was one of the few people he'd ever told, that he felt ashamed but couldn't stop. He didn't know why it happened, but it did. Then came the twist, something I wasn't prepared for, something I'll never forget. He told me that someone in his family, either a relative or a family friend, believed he was possessed, and so they decided that an exorcism was the only solution. I didn't know how to take this. It sounded insane, but he was serious. He said they performed it at night in a dark room, lit only by candles, and tied him to the bed because they didn't know how the demon might react. The tension in his voice grew, his words coming faster now, describing the exorcism as it unfolded. The ritual, the chanting, the strange sounds in the air that seemed to thicken with each passing minute. He choked up, almost unable to continue as he told me about the moment everything climaxed. They heard something hit the floor beneath the bed when the demon supposedly left his body. But it didn't stop there. He said something scrabbled across the floor in the dark. Something fast, something animalistic, moving so quickly that it left claw marks in the wood, deep gouges that no one could explain. It disappeared into the darkness, and the room fell silent. That was when it all stopped, he said. That was when he never hurt anything again. The exorcism had cured him, whatever that meant. I didn't know how to respond to that. He sounded so sincere, so terrified as he recounted the event. He believed it with all his heart. And I wasn't so sure, but whatever he experienced, I wasn't about to dismiss it. The whole thing was just unsettling. I didn't know if he was trying to tell me the truth, or if he was caught in some dark fantasy, but it didn't matter. I could feel the darkness in his voice. I didn't know what to say, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in that conversation any longer. My mind couldn't process it, couldn't make sense of it. So I did what anyone would do when confronted with something that sinister and unexplainable. I just noped out. I ended the conversation, but that feeling of unease lingered. That strange, unsettling story haunted me for a long time, and it wasn't just the story itself. It was the fear in his voice, the way he described everything as though he truly believed it was real. Maybe it was. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that I never spoke to him again after that. I couldn't. There are some things you can't unhear, and some stories that leave a mark, even if you can't fully grasp them. Thanks for watching. Be happy. Bye.